of Labor, of course, Ministry of Health, and other agencies to work with the community in a way that would minimize movement outside of the community, give all the necessary support to the community members, but effectively, that community would be under a quarantine situation. And in the meantime, over that 14-day period, we would assess to determine the extent of the spread of the virus and apply the appropriate levels of treatment to those individuals. So that is essentially, in simple form, what the decision that has been taken as it relates to that community and why.
Chris, why not just join me? Because you will have to go back and forth. So what it also means is that the JCF and the JDF has been deployed. There will be restrictions on movement in and out of the community. The Ministry of Health has made provisions to provide food packages, water supply where necessary, obviously medicine. This is not, we're not treating this like a curfew. And I want the citizens there to feel that the state is imposing a security cordon on them. This is for their own benefit as well as for the rest of Jamaica's benefit. The soldiers and policemen and women are appropriately geared, and I would ask CDS and the Commissioner if they would like to just give a brief description of what the operations would look like. CDS, if you would join.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. The troops have been deployed, JDF and JCF, to the community, and you will see us pretty much in the way you've seen us in the states of emergencies and zones of special operation, managing intersections and access points to the communities. The difference is going to be, whereas when we're doing a security operation, we would do check searches and allow people to proceed. In this case, we'll be seeking to restrict movement in and outside the community. Obviously, there are going to be situations where persons have legitimate reasons to be moving in and out, and in such cases, appropriate records will be kept, guided by the Ministry of Health as to what profile of persons may be allowed to enter and exit, and what documentation that will need to take place. But generally speaking, there will be more restrictions on people being allowed to enter and exit. As was indicated, provisions will be made by the Ministry of Health, and to make sure that the communities are the community is well served. What we ask, as usual, is that there be cooperation with the members of the security forces, as the Prime Minister has indicated. In this particular case, we're trying to protect the community and trying to ensure that we don't end up with unnecessary spread of the virus to the extent that it is there. So we ask for your cooperation with the security forces. Thank you.
So over the past few days and probably the past week, we've been taking some of our members through specific training to do this type of operation. So those people have been deployed now for this purpose. And it's really, as you say, to protect the wider community of Jamaica and protect those people inside, and just slow or reduce the chances of transmission into and out of the community. Obviously, our own members will be taking precautions to protect themselves as well. And so it's really important that people cooperate with our verbal instructions so that we can have everything running smoothly, as I say, it's all for in everyone's best interest and for everyone's protection.
I'm going to invite the CMO to join me. Thank you, gentlemen. CMO, because I think the public will be curious to know what would be the operations inside the zone from a health perspective, and how many persons are actually suspected within the zone. So I'm going to ask our CMO to give that detail.
Good evening, everyone. In doing our contact tracing, we have detected over 30 persons within the community that have had contact, direct and pretty close contact with our index case. And of those 30 persons, we have about 8 persons that are symptomatic right now. We consider that to be enough reason to be concerned. We realize that persons tend to move around. We realize that a lot more households than the households that we have interviewed were affected. And so therefore the community itself is concerned. It is therefore important for us to try to restrict the movement of persons to prevent further spread of the infection. The restrictions are really to protect the persons within the community and to protect persons outside of the community and to protect the country as a whole. Our aim during the next 14 days when the community is under these restrictions is to educate. Is to educate all the persons that are affected as to what it is that is happening to them, what it is that they are to expect from this illness, how it is that they can prevent this illness from getting worse, how it is that they can prevent their loved ones from becoming affected. So while the restrictions are not anything that anybody likes, but if you can prevent your loved one from becoming ill, and your loved one may be somebody who has a chronic illness or maybe at the age where despite the fact that you may get a mild illness, that person can get a severe illness. I am sure everybody would want to prevent that from happening. And so therefore we think that this is the best way to go. We really want to support the community, and as I said, health education, providing the necessary medical support as needed. So we will be in constant communication. We will be there on the ground as well, in constant communication with the security forces, with the JDF and the JCF, to identify persons who may be ill, to reach them early, and to be able to offer them assistance. So it is going to be a very intensive 2-week period, but we are hoping that within that 2-week period, we are going to limit any further spread of the infection.
Thank you very much, CMO. Now, just to place in context what we're doing, we've used the disaster risk management legislation, which is the overarching legislation which guides the government's response. The first use of the legislation was when we convened the Disaster Risk Management Council. Many, and I see some members here with us this evening, and they have been meeting, and I gather you met with them today, Minister Mackenzie, and they have been collaborating with the Ministry of Health. So I want the country to appreciate that the entire government and civil society and NGOs are mobilized, and that mobilization will become even more intense as we progress into this crisis that we now face. There are various subcommittees of the National Council all working on different areas. My job, Prime Minister, is to make sure that everything works together. And the Cabinet is in support of that, giving the general policy guidelines and promulgating the various initiatives as we are doing now. Now, the legislation also gives us certain powers to act. And the Attorney General is here with me, and I've asked her to go through all the powers that we have in law to address this particular kind of health crisis, which would include powers that would place an obligation on citizens to report. And citizens reporting is an absolutely important part of us being successful in overcoming these infectious challenges. The truth is that if persons hide conditions when asked, give misleading information when asked, then that can cause its own stream of negative consequences for which we would have no knowledge and would not be able to respond. So some of the laws do place an obligation and indeed creates an offense for misleading the public health officials. So I'm going to ask the AG to just very quickly give the public an overview of all the legislation that is there and the various powers that comes with them.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good evening, everyone. In respect of the laws that we have, starting with the Constitution, of course, you'd be aware of Section 69, which gives the Cabinet as the principal instrument of policy and with responsibility for the overall direction of government and overarching power to determine comprehensive policy. We also have Section 20, which empowers the Governor General to issue a proclamation declaring a state of public disaster. But we have not gone that route. Instead, the Prime Minister has utilized the powers under the 2015 Disaster Risk Management Act to declare the whole of Jamaica as a disaster area, consequent on the notification he got from the Minister of Local Government and Community Development. Then we have the Emergency Powers Act, we have the Public Health Act, giving responsibility to the Minister with responsibility for health and also to the local board. And essentially those are broad investigative powers in relation to disease and the prevention of disease in parishes, and to do, more importantly, whatever is necessary to arrest the spread of disease. The Minister of Health also has responsibility, after receiving a report from the Central Health Committee or the local board in respect of any threat, to issue directions, and the Minister has already activated those powers to enforce measures to prevent and mitigate the spread of this communicable disease. The Public Health Act, again, authorizes the medical officer health or persons authorized in writing by the Minister of Health or the local board the right of entry upon any private premises to take action considered necessary in the interest of public health. So it means,
say that in standard,
right,
in standard
which
Jamaica.
means that if there is suspicion that something is happening in your private places, the minister may authorize entry there to investigate. It requires no warrant. It doesn't need your permission, because the step is being taken to prevent the spread of the disease. Minister of Health also is making additional regulations in relation to the treatment and prevention of this communicable disease, the isolation of patients, disinfecting and closing and destroying, if need be, of buildings which are in which infected persons have lodged. So if it's a stall, if it's anything, if the powers and the assessment require destruction, the minister is authorized under law to do so. I want to, with the Prime Minister having declared Jamaica as a disaster area, I just want to remind persons of specific duties. So under the public health food handling regulations, and in particular regulations 27, 29 to 32, operators and employees of food establishment, handling establishment, are under duty to be free from this COVID if you're working in the food establishment. So you must take every step to prevent yourself from coming into contact with persons who are suspected of having the disease. Medical officer is also under duty to notify if an operator suspects an employee or other person who enters a food handling establishment, if that person is suspected of suffering from the COVID. The operator and employee can also be required to be medically examined. And if you are so required, I have to tell you, you really have to comply. The minister will advise of his amendment to the Class 1 notifiable disease order shortly to specifically include the COVID-19. The tourist establishment regulations.
Could you explain what the implication of that?
So essentially, the Public Health Act, the Quarantine Act, the Public Health Act specifies a number of diseases, and in the last time the notification was done, I think, was when we had the threat of Ebola. So now the minister has moved to formally utilize the powers under the law. So this is not just informal operation, and it activates all of the provisions of the law and all of the powers, and the powers are very large. Essentially, the minister can do whatever is required to contain the disease.
So including reporting. So this is a disease for which you must report.
Prime Minister, it also includes giving answers to questions that may be asked of persons. And I want to remind that we do have an offense at common law of creating public mischief. We know a lot of information is being circulated, and some persons are delighting themselves in just being idle and passing around false information. You do so at your peril, because every constable is now authorized to enforce all of the laws in relation to the Quarantine Act. Specifically, Section 12 of the Quarantine Act places a duty on every constable to enforce compliance with any order, instruction, or condition that is made or imposed under the Act, using force if necessary. And they can enter your private premises to so enforce. So there is really no room to hide, and we're asking everyone to cooperate, because the government must act and must take every step necessary to safeguard you. To go back to duties that are imposed under the Public Health Tourism Establishment Regulations, Regulation 30, there is a duty to report to the medical officer where there is suspicion or confirmation of the COVID or any other communicable disease. And owners and operators must report. I know Minister Bartlett is already aware and is taking steps to circulate it to players in the industry. Then we have our hairdressers and our beauty therapists and our cosmetologists and beauty salons. We do have a regulation which specifically speaks to those operations. Regulations 11, 13, and 14 in particular imposes duties on the beauty therapist, the cosmetologist, the hairdresser, and the local board to ensure that you are not contaminated and that you are not contaminating anyone. So you are under duty to be free from this disease when working in your capacity as a beauty therapist, as a cosmetologist, and as a hairdresser. And please note that the local board can revoke your license if you're found to be suffering from this disease. And then the barbers and barber shops are also specifically regulated under the Public Health Barbers and Barbershop Regulations. And Regulations 11, 13, and 14 imposes a duty on the barber also to be free from the disease, meaning that you must not put yourself in harm's way. Get out of the way and ensure that you are not inviting persons or entertaining persons who are at risk. And your license too can be revoked. And Prime Minister has already indicated that the laws will be strictly enforced in this period. Thank you.
Thank you, AG. We went through that brief overview, and we will produce documents and videos and memes for social media so that everyone is aware of the state in which we are now operating. And just to reinforce the point, the government has a very high duty and obligation to enforce the law, and we will enforce the law. Overnight, we declared, as we said we would, the results of the tests that were conducted. I'm going to ask Minister Tufton to just give you an overview of that.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. And just listening to the AG and the awesome powers that she has bestowed on me, according to law, I'm almost intimidated. But I want to say that I will take no decision without the counsel of the Cabinet and the Honourable Prime Minister and all the necessary advisors in the ministry and otherwise, and it will always be in the best interest of the country, just for the record. So we announced as soon as we got confirmatory tests, and I want to emphasize, because again, I saw a number of social media postings prior to our posting the results, suggesting that we had more positives. And part of the difficulty with that is that the tests are administered, which gives you a preliminary result and a confirmatory result. And for whatever reason, there are persons who had access to the preliminary results, and the impression was given that somehow we were withholding. But we don't do that. We have made a commitment to be as transparent as possible as it relates to this issue. I had to wait until I got the confirmatory results, and that was not available until much later in the night. And as soon as we got it, I had consultations with the Prime Minister and he with the Cabinet members, and the decision was taken to release within a few hours of getting it, just to clarify. So the results are as follows. 2 males aged 63 and 67 who came into the island on March 7th from Trinidad, having traveled from Malaysia by way of Dubai and London, and they presented at hospital on March 11th. 1 male, 36, who traveled from Manchester, England. He was taken to hospital from his hotel via an ambulance on March 11th. 1 male, 31, a Jamaican overseas ship worker who came in from the Canary Islands via Portugal and Miami. He arrived in the island on February 25th and presented to hospital with symptoms on March 10th. And 1 male, 52, who is the father of the first patient who was confirmed with COVID-19. He was discovered ill at home on March 11th. And 1 female, 34, who is a close contact also of the first patient, who was confirmed similarly so, based on the contact with that first patient. I should note, and this is a point worth making, that we have patients in isolation in Mandeville, St. Anne's Bay, Cornwall Regional, Chess Hospital, and the University Hospital of the West Indies. And I make the point, not just to be transparent, but to say that the public health system does have the capacity to provide the isolation services that are required, the personnel to provide the appropriate levels of services in these institutions. Now, I know these numbers are small and they're expected to rise, but it's an indication of a trial run, if you will, in preparation for what may have to be the case later on. And then, of course, in terms of quarantine, the team has been out in the field in the respective areas, interviewing, collecting information, getting information from those patients, and by extension, therefore, developing the contact profile for others to determine how to proceed in terms of moving forward.
Thank you, Minister. Yeah. Now, so that we understand overall strategy. The first strategy of the government was to delay the virus from getting into Jamaica. And we acted very early, putting in place travel restrictions and managing our ports, specifically as it related to cruise ship docking in Jamaica. And I believe we've been very successful. In fact, we would have been 120th or something like that out of the countries in the world for it to come to our shores. But we always knew that it would come. Our strategy was to delay it as long as possible. So now we are into the phase that we can conduct effectively contact tracing. So we want to use that as far as possible, CMO, to contain. And what we're doing now are taking all the measures within the next 14 days. We are in that 14-day period of containment. And we're going to try as hard as possible to contain it. And the two strategies of prevention and containment, they have to work together for some time. And therefore, we wish to today announce that we will impose a travel restriction or travel restriction on the United Kingdom. The Minister of Foreign Affairs is here if you would want to join us, if there might be things you would want to explain. I'll ask the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health if you would want to join us as well to explain what that means, the travel restrictions. You would want to explain it? Or?
Well, I could start, but it's really health that does the declaration.
So good afternoon, everyone.
Evening.
Good evening. My apologies. So the travel restrictions are in similar light to the travel restrictions that we have put in place for the 8 other countries that are on our restriction list. First, only citizens and persons who have residency or long stay arrangements or marriage exemptions will be landed in country. All other persons will not be landed at this time. Additionally, persons who are landed will now be required to be quarantined. And based on the Ministry of Health's risk assessment, the quarantine will be either in facility if you display symptoms, or you will be home quarantined. The restriction also applies where persons will be required to self-identify once they have come from this country, given that they are already in Ireland. And so if you are a citizen in Ireland who have come from the United Kingdom and you believe that you are beginning to display symptoms, we ask that you self-identify by contacting our 888 number. It's 888-1-LOVE. And once you contact us, we will begin to give you the necessary instructions. Our email is also up and running. It is covid19@moh.gov.jm. And we ask that citizens who believe that they are affected or because of their travel history, that they take the necessary actions to inform the health officials within these medium that we have advised. Thank you.
All right. AG, you would want to just make your...
Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, just to say that in relation to travel restrictions, there are powers under the Immigration Restrictions Commonwealth Citizens Act, and also under the Immigration Restriction Commonwealth Citizens Act and Immigration Restrictions Commonwealth Citizens Regulations under the Alien Act as well. And essentially, a health officer or an immigration officer may declare a person a prohibited immigrant because of that person's condition in relation to a communicable disease. the immigration officer, health officer, as well as the minister with responsibility for immigration, who is the Minister of National Security, in respect of a prohibited immigrant who has the disease, may exercise discretion to allow them or to deny them stay on the island, and also to subject them to quarantine and isolation. The Minister of National Security will also be exercising his powers in relation to the promulgation of regulations for the ports of entries and the times and places and conduct of inquiry or examinations, medical or otherwise, in respect of persons entering or persons desiring to enter the island. And if need be, we will also activate the powers to have removed from Jamaica anyone who's declared a prohibited immigrant as a result of the disease. And generally, the immigration officers are instructed and reminded of their powers to refuse to land anyone where the health officer certifies that they are undesirable in relation to the disease.
Thank you, AG.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The Permanent Secretary did his usual creditable job in clarifying or laying out the criteria for the travel restrictions. Essentially, they follow the exact same lines as the restrictions in respect of the other countries for which Jamaica has imposed these restrictions. Just to clarify that when these announcements are being made, there are likely to be planes in the air from the United Kingdom. So these planes will be landed, but it is anticipated that flights that would be scheduled for tomorrow and going forward, that those will take, or rather the restrictions will be applied thereto. It would not be appropriate, reasonable, or perhaps impossible without legal consequence were we to apply them prior to the airlines being notified. And accordingly, those processes are already underway, having been triggered by the ministry responsible for tourism and the other relevant agencies and departments.
Thank you very much, Minister Johnson-Smith. One of the things I want the public to see, to understand, to appreciate, is that though there is a crisis, there is no breakdown in law and order or the functioning of the state. In fact, what we're doing is using law to create order by ensuring that the state functions. And which is why we have gone through with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that we are well aware of the legal framework in which we are operating. Why? Because there will be life after COVID. And people may want to utilize the judicial system, whether it is overseas or local. And therefore, we are making sure that whatever we do is well within the bounds of the law. And that is an important signal to send to the country that it doesn't mean that this is the end of days. This is a state must be able to use its laws and its bureaucracy to respond to challenges. And that is what this government is ensuring will happen. I'm going to call on Minister Mackenzie shortly, but before I do, Minister Tufton has some other things that he needs to bring to your attention.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. So just to give 3 more minutes of what are some of the other things that public health is doing. We have begun the process of expanding our isolation areas in hospitals across the country. So today I was in Montego Bay, we met with the 4 parishes of Western Jamaica, and the plans are in place. Areas of the hospital have been identified, and those areas are going to be cleared out and essentially become the isolation ward for that parish. Now, we all know that we don't have hospital beds just laying idly down for COVID or any other such special occurrence. So it's going to mean some prioritization. So part of providing that isolation area is also to provide an alternative. I'll give you an example. just to give you sort of a practical sense of what we're doing. We are converting in one case what was the accident and emergency facility into an isolation ward. So we'll equip it with all the necessary furniture, and with the allocation of resource from the Ministry of Finance, we have already on order ICU beds, ventilators, and so on. Some we have, a few, but we have to get more. So that is now taking place, and we expect that in the coming week, we would have had a number of those wards up and running, and the alternative arrangements made for persons who would need to vacate those facilities. The other thing that we're doing quickly is expanding the personnel to deal with what we anticipate will come. So we have been in dialogue with the Cuban ambassador, and by extension the Cuban government, to get an additional cadre of nurses, and we so far specialist nurses. So on the 24th of March, we will see our first 21 nurses arriving on the island from Cuba. These are nurses that we have a strong relationship with Cuba as it relates to nurses. We have over 300 health professionals that are Cuban working in our public health system. So that tradition is strong. We made a special appeal given the challenges. We're trying to get about 100 additional specialist nurses in the system, focusing primarily on high-intensity units or ICU units. So the first 21 will come. We're also in dialogue with retired nurses, and I want to use the opportunity to encourage our professionals who have reached retirement age but still very skilled and experienced. We're inviting them back to work with us during this period, and this is an official invitation. So that is also being worked on. In terms of equipment, the masks and the other critical equipment, we have in inventory. I've done some checks myself and I've seen some, but I really want to say one thing. We have lost a lot of our equipment through pilferage, persons stealing the equipment from the public health system. Now on the gears, the protective gears, the masks in particular. Now, on the face of it, it raises two issues. It says that we have to tighten up our internal management structures. I'll take the burden for that, and we're going to work to try and do that. But worse, I think, it really speaks to an unfortunate breakdown in just our social conscience, not to mention the deviant behavior, which is obviously illegal. It really is a sad commentary that given these times when we need this equipment, persons are actually stealing and selling in the marketplace. Indeed, my information is that the police has so far identified one location where a box, well, several boxes, nearly 40 boxes of masks were found, taken from one hospital in Kingston, the Kingston Public Hospital. And I know the police will exercise their right and authority to pursue those individuals. But it's an indication of the challenges that we face. So I want to encourage Jamaicans, please refrain from doing this, and those who see it happening, give us the information and don't participate in that, because you're really contributing to the challenges that we face. Final thing I'll say for now, I'm told that I have to read the notice, so I'll officially read it. The Public Health Act. The Public Health Class 1 Notification Disease Amendment Order 2020, in exercise of the powers conferred upon the Minister by Section 2 of the Public Health Act. The following order is hereby made. This order may be cited as the Public Health Class 1 Notification Disease Amendment Order 2020, and shall be read and construed as one with the Public Health Class 1 Notification Diseases Order 2009, thereinafter referred to as the Principal Order, and all amendments thereto. The Principal Order is amended in the schedule by inserting next, after item 5, the following item: 5A SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19, dated this 13th day of March 2020, with my signature. Thank you.
So with that, we would have largely completed the public health section of this presentation. Chris and AG, thank you. We now move over to some other issues, still slightly public health, but Minister Mackenzie. Now, this particular disease has shown to be devastating on our senior population, on senior population, and we don't want it to affect our seniors here. So the Minister of Local Government has taken some steps to ensure that our infirmaries, our golden age homes, and other state institutions which care for senior citizens, that there are measures in place to address those.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Ministry of Local Government has direct responsibility for our infirmaries and golden age home. There are 13 infirmaries across the country, plus 3 golden age home, with a capacity of over some 3,500 senior citizens residing under the care of the state. 98% of those within our infirmaries fall within the risk category that is considered the most threatened of the individuals that could be affected by the disease. Therefore, the ministry has taken the following decisions with immediate effect: to restrict access to our infirmaries for the next 14 days. Now, we are doing this because a number of persons normally visit our infirmaries, not just Jamaicans, but foreigners. So we are restricting visit to our infirmary for the next 14 days. And the next 30 days, we are also restricting new residents to our infirmary. So it means that persons who have already been interviewed and identified to be accepted to our infirmaries, we will be putting a hold on that for the next 30 days. Also, we are establishing isolation areas within the infirmaries. At least 4 infirmaries presently have that facility. Those infirmaries that are without isolation areas, construction will commence immediately, working closely with the Ministry of Health in putting in the necessary infrastructure to facilitate an isolation area in our infirmaries. We are also working with the OPM and the Jamaica Defense Force to commence a comprehensive sanitation of our infirmaries. And we are also moving further to create a temporary employment program in our infirmaries and golden age home to have cleaning on a regular basis of our infirmaries. We are also moving to provide adequate medical and nutritional support to the infirmaries. We have also moved to put in place the necessary emergency management service. The Jamaica Fire Brigade is equipped in 5 parishes to provide ambulance services, and those areas without ambulance services, we have already contacted and make arrangements with private operators to provide those requisite service if and when those services will be required. We are moving to renovate a cluster at the Vineyard Town Golden Age Home and a section of the Maypen Infirmary to house social cases from our hospitals. In discussions with the Ministry of Health, there are over 132 such cases that are occupying bed spaces in our hospitals, and the infirmary is moving to create facility to ensure that we accommodate those we can. We are making provisions to house 50 such cases out of our public hospitals. I want to make a special appeal to persons. Cooperate with us, because we are speaking about a population that is vulnerable, and God help us if we should fall prey to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Mackenzie. Now, the last time I spoke to you, the question was asked about water and utilities, and I committed that we would have a meeting with the utilities. Minister Favour Williams is here, and Minister Vaz is here to give me some assistance with water. But we'll start with Minister Williams to just give us a brief update on the state of our electricity and our telecommunications services, how ready they are to withstand any challenges.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good afternoon, everyone, or good night, everyone. So I met today with the telcos and had a teleconference with JPS. In terms of the telcos, they went through with me their emergency and business continuity plans, which included identifying critical team members, ensuring that they had redundancy, ramping up their monitoring of the network, and pretty much treating the situation as a disaster. And I heard this from both companies. They've also indicated that, to the extent possible, they are requiring persons to work from home and ensuring that this is so. In terms of what it is that they'd be able to do in short order to increase connectivity or bandwidth, they are going to be looking at their networks to see what they could possibly do. In terms of the interface with the customers, they were going to put on additional persons to be answering calls. They also agreed that for the numbers that the Ministry of Health has published, persons will be able to get access to those numbers even if they don't have credit on their phone. And I want to take this opportunity to remind you as well that all the government websites are zero-rated, meaning you can get access to them even if you don't have a data plan. In terms of JPS, had a teleconference with them and the team. They've also activated their emergency planning. I'm pleased to report that the important issue of having capacity, they have indicated to me that they have the biggest margin of capacity they've ever had in the system, meaning they have some 300 megawatts above the peak demand, and if necessary, there's an additional 60 megawatts on standby if needed. They've activated their business continuity. They're ensuring that their system control center is adequately manned. They're looking at just different ways of ensuring that they stay on top of things. For example, they said for the system control center, which is the heart of their grid management, that they'd be working from 3 locations, of which 2 are backup locations, that they have some 90 days of food supply. They're in touch with all the independent power providers to operate from an emergency basis as well. They've put in place, from a financial perspective, they've put in place their emergency cash planning and cash strategy. So that means they are already in touch with their bankers to ensure that there is smooth sailing that way. And let me just add as well, Petrojam. We've spoken with Petrojam as well. Petrojam has indicated that for all their products, there is adequate supply. And as of yesterday, when I spoke with them, there were no issues that they saw on the horizon in terms of supplies. We have an agreement that of all the entities that I've spoken about, that we will be in touch daily, if there's any update from their side as well as from the government side. So this is the update I have as of today, and if needs be, if there are changes, we'll communicate that to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Now the difficult one, water. Firstly, let me start by acknowledging that, water is life, and certainly with the COVID threat, it is even more so. The challenge we've had is that our infrastructure, our water infrastructure, is very much aged. We have started the process, however, of upgrading the water infrastructure. So, for example, on the recently completed Constant Spring Road project, we have changed out a distribution line which is 80 years old. I personally went and looked at a section of that line, and it is totally corroded and encrusted. The volume of water that should be going through that line is probably reduced to maybe 20 or 30% of its capacity. But after 80 years in existence, the line is obsolete, but it is still carrying water. That line has to be connected now to the existing system, and customers, road users would see the NWC digging up the road at various intersections. That is in the process of making the connection. I have with me here Mr. Garth Jackson, who is the Vice President of the NWC. Would you care to join us, Garth? I know you're reluctantly moving to do so, but... So that's part of the challenge we face. You would have seen, those of you who travel on the Mandela Highway, you would have seen 2 pipelines running parallel to the Mandela Highway. Again, that's new water infrastructure that we have put in place, which will carry about 3 million gallons, additional 3 million gallons of water into the corporate area. They have just connected into an existing pipeline along the Washington Boulevard that would see communities off Washington Boulevard and off Malines Road being their service improved. The major challenge would be for communities off or along Spanish Town Road going into downtown Kingston. That line, again, is probably over 60 years old. It cannot take any pressure. So though it is carrying water, if it were to carry water under pressure, which means that the water would be able to go up 2 or 3 stories, then that pipe would break. And you would see them digging up Spanish Town Road from time to time, trying to patch, and that is because whenever the pressure is increased on those pipes, they break, or when there is no water in them at times, they collapse. That just tells you that those pipes have to be abandoned. We have allocated and started the process of procurement. Well, we have passed that procurement process. We have almost awarded a contract, just about awarded a contract for $60 million US. And that would mean replacing that main. it will take a year to do. I can only but tell you what the reality is. In the interim, we have to put in mitigating measures. I have gotten numerous calls and complaints about Mandeville. And what has happened in Mandeville is that one of the supply areas for Mandeville, the pepper pump, that pump, which is a high volume pump, has malfunctioned and has to be rebuilt, and the parts for rebuilding that pump are ordered. They come from overseas, but obviously with what is happening, there is no guarantee that we will get them on the projected date. It is projected that we should have the parts to complete the repairs by Wednesday of next week, and that they could do the installation on that weekend following. However, I would not here give any undertaking that the parts will come as we have projected, given what is happening. So in the interim, and there are other communities where we have received all the calls about water. What we will have to do as a backup measure is to increase our spending and our organization and logistics around trucking. So what I have decided to do is to assign Minister Vaz and Minister Mackenzie the responsibility to directly oversee trucking of water. Now the responsibilities will be divided into two. First, Minister Vaz will be responsible for trucking of water within what is described the utility area, meaning areas that the NWC serves. And customers, specifically now, public bodies, so, well, school is out for 14 days, but the essential services, our police stations, our hospitals, our clinics, health centers, correctional services, the infirmaries, libraries if they continue to remain open, public offices including the Inland Revenue and all public buildings that require water but are not being served by the NWC, though they are within the utility area of the NWC. Minister Vaz is to develop a plan and a schedule and have those public bodies and essential services informed as to how they will get their water from a trucking schedule. Minister Mackenzie will be assigned the duty of ensuring that communities that are outside of the utility zone, those that are served by minor water supply but are not getting water, that there is a trucking schedule in collaboration with the municipal corporations to ensure that there is a routine, reliable schedule of trucking for water. I'll have both of them say a few words on that. However, we recognize that the government simply does not have in its stock all the trucks. In fact, we have very few trucks. And so we have to depend on private contractors. And I suspect that within Jamaica, there are several persons who own water trucks, and the government is now putting in place a program to have payments done in an expedited way and in a seamless way, because the challenge has been in the past that private contractors would come on, they would provide their trucks, but it would be difficult for them to get payment. We have worked that out now, and Minister Vaz will be in charge of that. We will not sacrifice or in any way lessen the requirements for the sterilization of the trucks. All trucks must be sterilized. So I'm going to now turn over to Minister Vaz.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Colleagues, I think Prime Minister, you said most everything. As one who represents a rural constituency, I'm very aware of the challenges that are there, both in terms of the major water supplies, which is the National Water Commission, and the minor water supplies, which is served by the municipal corporation. What I think we have to do, especially in these circumstances, is to have a cohesion in terms of how we plan and deliver the water, and most importantly, that people can be assured that they will get paid on a timely basis, because you are now working with private sector demand as against government demand. So if the private sector is paying and paying quickly, then obviously it will lessen our chances of getting the trucks that we need. But I'm confident with Minister Mackenzie's experience and my common sense that we'll be able to put together a really good plan and assure the people of Jamaica, especially in this time when water, they say water is life. Well, water is more than life now, especially in this situation with this unfortunate virus. So I just want to reassure the public. I know that water has been a long-standing issue and a very, very angry issue for a lot of people. And just to say that we are aware of it, and the Prime Minister in his wisdom has given me, not that I'm the minister, don't get me wrong, but I will work assiduously with Minister Mackenzie to make sure that the people get the required water and the services. Thank you.
Thank you again, Prime Minister. This is a golden opportunity to streamline the system and to ensure that it is coordinated. The Ministry of Local Government, we have started to create what we call water shops in a number of parishes. And with this added responsibility, we are giving the assurance that we will work collectively to ensure that those communities who are desperately in need of that precious commodity will have it. We're going to ask that it is going to take us a little time to put a proper system in place, but while we are doing that, we will take the necessary steps to ensure that the communities that are in need will receive the commodity as quickly as possible.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. I promise you we'll be finished in 15 minutes. Minister of Tourism, Ed Bartlett, we would just like to give a very quick update as to what is happening in tourism, because that is a sector that is now seriously affected. Minister Bartlett.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I suppose only Prime Ministers can lay hands on anyone subtly. We, in tourism, as you know, are really not unaccustomed to disruptions. In fact, it's the only truly resilient industry in the world today. And we have been meeting ever since these challenges have emerged. And we have been talking with each other. We've been talking with our partners. And this is one of the main elements of the resilience, is partnership building and ensuring that we are always communicating. And so today we had a major program of all stakeholders. And those who couldn't be in the room were connected by telecommunication arrangements, and we also were able to look at key protocols in relation to enabling all our tourism entities to subscribe fully to the protocols of the Ministry of Health. Health security is an essential part of the promise of our destination for safety, security, and seamlessness. And we are satisfied that Jamaica is showing the world how tourism resilience can enable a recovery that is going to be quicker and indeed a growth. And I can tell you that the elements of that are there. And we're down to a growth trajectory that is going to be frightening to many. The truth is that we have, as a destination, managed and grew during recessions and global disruptions. The recession of 2008-9, Jamaica was the only destination in the region that grew by 3.5% every year during the period. And so there's no doubt about that. I have, however, to report to you that the cruise industry has, as we had predicted, literally come to a halt. The CLEAR, which is the umbrella organization responsible for all cruise lines in the world, announced today that they are voluntarily suspending cruise operation on every route as of 12 midnight on the 14th of September. So what that will mean is that no cruise ship, March, I'm sorry, what that would mean is that no cruise ship will be coming to Jamaica or anywhere in the world. And I think that we understand that what that will mean. We'll quantify and let you know at a point in time. But just to let you know that to date, with all the travel advisories, and in our industry, that's what we talk about, travel advisories. We don't talk about restrictions or banning or those, we say advisories. So all the travel, the elevated travel advisories that we have had to deal with, that in all of it, your country is still holding its own. Because to date, we are still growing at 3% over last year. And I think that going forward, there will be some challenges, but all our partners are saying that by July or thereabout, we hope things will turn. And after that, they all will be selling Jamaica. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Ed. So I think we've presented to the country now a fairly comprehensive plan between yesterday and today. By no means this is a complete plan, and it will change and probably is already changing by the hour as things develop. We will respond. Let me just share with you briefly what my outlook is, and to prepare the minds of Jamaicans. We will see an increase in confirmed cases. We will see an increase in suspected cases. But I believe that the measures that we have taken has flattened the curve. That is the jargon used in terms of describing the activities necessary to manage the crisis. In other words, once disease is in your country, it usually spikes, and sometimes the spikes could be very steep. But if you put in place, especially within the first 2 weeks of the discovery of the disease in your country, providing that you had very good surveillance from the start, then instead of having this, you could have this, which is a much slower pace of increase in the infections. We want to have that pace of increase as slow as possible so that our health system, which has limited capacity, remember now, we are just coming out of a dengue crisis. Many of our citizens have what is described as the pre-existing conditions, the diabetes, the respiratory problems, the heart problems. And those weaken our ability to withstand the ravages of the virus. And so our health system is already under stress, and now to put this on top of it is really going to create a problem, which is why the government has to respond in this way to contain the virus. As it evolves, the focus of the government will at some point pivot to address treatment. And in fact, we have already started to discuss how that will work and the drugs that we will need to get in, and all which the CMO and the Minister of Health will say more of when we get to that point. And then we expect that it will start to decline and then subside and peter out. What we do as a government, as a country, but more importantly, as individuals, will determine whether or not we have a spike like this or it is a spike like this. So I appeal today, in closing, that as individuals, we have to act in smart ways, follow advice and information provided by the government. I urge you, ignore the fake news, stop circulating the nonsense that is being put sometimes out there. Use your own sense of proper context. In other words, sometimes, on my phone, I see all kinds of things come. And what I recognize is that it distracts me. It shifts my attention because you have to be looking at all kinds of things, whereas you really need to be focused. And you can imagine if that is the case all around. So at this stage, you can rest assured that this government is going to communicate with you. We are going to use all channels to provide you with correct, legitimate, accurate information and timely information, no matter what hour of the night. Minister Tufton and myself were in communication at about 11 o'clock last night, and then we communicated till about 1 o'clock when we made the release. So we are up and we are working because we recognize that in the absence of information, there is a vacuum that will be filled by people who have sometimes, sometimes it's political, but sometimes it's just mischief. And we can do without that at this stage. I urge you to take your information from credible sources. The government of Jamaica should be your first credible source of information. And the media has been very cooperative in carrying what we say and publishing the information that we have given. One point of correction, which is important to note, the first press conference that I gave, I said that one patient number 2, was a non-Jamaican. Further information is that patient number 2 is a Jamaican. Right? So that's for accuracy and completeness. But of course, with a travel history coming from London. So that's very important that we clarify. And you can rest assured that if we get it wrong, once we discover, we will come and tell you this is what the situation is. So we are now in the trust building phase exercise. This is what it is, so that the public can just act on what we say rather than having to second guess and use information from sources which are not verifiable sources. All right? My own view is that if we're successful in these 14 days and every citizen follows the quarantine, reports, I know the challenge of reporting to the Ministry of Health through the lines because everybody's calling in, that will improve as people realize that the panic phase is not necessary and people use the lines with discretion. In the interim, send in your email so that we know. If you feel ill, and I've seen a case where persons panicked, they felt ill, and they left their house, took a taxi, wanting to go to the hospital. That is just transmitting the disease. If you feel ill, the first thing you should do is isolate yourself. Then get persons who are probably close to you to make a call on your behalf if you can't do it. Get through to the health system and we will respond to you. But don't just turn up at the hospitals because that is just further spreading and contagion. Keep social distance. Very important. And the recs up, I've seen 6 feet and I have seen 3 feet. Well, I would be right in between 3 and 6 feet. Wash your hands regularly. There's a lot of complaints out there that hand sanitizers, but that is being worked on. We will get those in, and they are manufactured here locally. We are working behind the scenes to iron out all the kinks. Of course, just keeping a positive outlook and a good frame of mind will help. I'm confident that we will get over this, and Jamaica will, my own view, and I think that it is almost providential that this has happened, so we get a chance to reflect on what we're doing, to recalibrate some things that we're doing, and then we will get back on that growth trajectory that we had started. The Minister of Finance, I know, is working very hard. He gave his press conference yesterday, and the Cabinet on Monday will discuss further measures, refine them, and then we'll come to you. I may not be able to hold any more press conference until I've completed my budget speech, which is on the 19th. So the next time you will probably see me addressing the nation would be in Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, it is 11 minutes to 8 o'clock. We thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we allow you to go and, of course, be able to meet your deadlines. Thank you, everyone, and see you again soon. Remember that this here at the banquet hall is where we'll have all the media conferences, so listen out for the next one that will be called.